Hello and welcome to the Daily Faded. I am Hetz. This is where we get faded daily and do some politics and news and stuff like that. I'm sorry I wasn't here last night, but I got some real back problems and I couldn't sit like this last night. So I wasn't able to do this show. Sorry about that. I'm getting treatment for it tomorrow, so fingers crossed, hopefully the pain will go away soon. So today is June 16th, 2020, and Scotus got it right twice. Before I get into that, let me do the coronavirus update. We're over 8.2 million cases worldwide and almost at 446 deaths worldwide. The US has over 2.2 million confirmed cases and is up to 119,132 deaths. And in California, we're up over 159,000 with 5,205 deaths. People are still suffering and dying from this thing, and all the people who play it down are assholes, to put it simply. They're just assholes. So, wow, Supreme Court yesterday, just wow. And right after Donald Trump changed the sex discrimination rules in Obamacare, the Supreme Court comes out and says 6-3 with Neil Gorsuch writing the decision that LGBTQ people are covered in Title VII, no sex discrimination in employment, which will lead to no sex discrimination in a whole bunch of other areas because Title VII is usually used as foundational case law. So it's really incredible news. And it's amazing that Gorsuch wrote the decision. What's interesting is that I heard Chase Strangelove from the ACLU, who was one of the attorneys on the case on Democracy Now! He's on there all the time. And they talked about how they targeted Gorsuch with their argument because he claims to be such a textualist and he claims to be about interpreting the law that is on the paper, not trying to get into the head of what Congress was thinking when they passed the law, which is another approach that is taken in jurisprudence. So they went after him and they landed him. And that's the big fish. 6-3 is, that's a big win. That's a big bipartisan. Supposedly it's not supposed to be partisan. But so I had a problem with this lighter. It stopped working on me. And I'm smoking the Moondrops tonight, which is the best pain relief I know. So I have to use this lighter. Now this one's not working. I should stop smoking. Except then what would I do for a show? And then the other big Supreme Court thing that happened was they deferred to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on their decision about qualified immunity for cops. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals had found against qualified immunity. And the Supreme Court said they're not going to hear the case, which means the standing case law is the Ninth Circuit's ruling. So that is also good news today. It's really interesting. I've lost track of all the minor pieces of progress that we already seem to have been making with the Black Lives Matter movement. I was thinking about trying to just write a list and then compile it, you know, um, but that would take so much work. No, I don't know. Maybe I'll do that. On the Scotus decision, the first one, the LGBTQ rights one, Sagar and Jetty made an interesting argument today on Rising. He's the conservative of the two, but he's a populist conservative. He's not the kind of conservative you're thinking of. In any case, and he basically tells the truth. He argued that this is the worst thing to happen in Donald Trump's presidency for him politically, because his whole argument was about getting those Federalist judges appointed to the bench. And this is the guy who took Scalia's spot. He took Scalia's spot. Trump put him there. And look what he just did. And he literally thinks it's the first thing that Trump has done that could cause a schism in his base. That evangelicals and cultural conservatives will really, really be put off by the fact that Neil Gorsuch wrote this decision, if they're following it, if they're paying attention. It's pretty big news. It's hard to miss. So it is bad news for Trump because his appointment failed him and failed the conservative movement. And it's also really important to point out Gorsuch didn't have to do this. He just thought he was interpreting the law literally and that it was a simple decision. And I agree. From what I read of his decision, a little blurb that was in the New York Times or wherever I read it, it's a real simple case that the LGBTQ community should have their rights protected under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which prevents discrimination on the basis of sex. And conservatives are really going after Gorsuch hard. And Jetty wasn't necessarily going after him so hard. I don't know. He didn't make his opinion clear on where he stood on the issue. But anyway, I have a random COVID story. I don't have many COVID stories tonight, but I have a random COVID story. New York City contact tracers have been instructed not to ask people who test positive for COVID-19, not to ask them if they have gone to any protests. That's a specific instruction that's been given to New York City health contact tracers. And that is a gross politicization of the public health, the responsibilities of a public health official. I wouldn't want to get in the way of science, and the science of contact tracing is to trace all of the possible contacts, all of the possible places where you might have been able to get it. And to say you can't ask whether or not they've been to the protests, that's ridiculous, because obviously the protest is someplace where someone is more likely to catch COVID-19 than if they're sitting in their living room. So shame on Bill de Blasio for politicizing that. It's really disgusting. I don't know if it's de Blasio or Cuomo who's behind it, or just some douchebag underling who reports to them. But it's obvious that anyone who's been tested positive has to be asked about when they've been out in public. So you may have heard about this already. I hate to repeat it. It's something I wanted to talk about yesterday. Elena Dugdale from KPCC reports the LA Sheriff's Department is now walking back their initial finding that Robert Fuller's death was likely a suicide. The cause of death is still under investigation. Fuller was found hanging from a tree in Palmdale on June 10th. LA County Medical Examiner Coroner Jonathan Lucas said they initially labeled Fuller's death as likely a suicide because there was no evidence of foul play at the scene. The investigation now involves dissecting the rope and the knot to see how it was tied. Many in these communities say the deaths were lynchings, not suicide, referring to Malcolm Harsh as well. Palmdale and Victorville are 50 miles apart. The region has a history of white supremacist organizations. In Palmdale, a DOJ investigation found housing discrimination aided by the LA Sheriff's Department against Black residents. Malcolm Harsh was 50 miles away in Victorville on May 31st, also found hanging from a tree, not officially ruled a suicide, yet pending toxicity reports. California Attorney General Javier Becerra, who I've had issues with in the past, I mean, not like in person, like I didn't get into a bar fight with him or anything, but he's sending investigators to assist in the inquiry of the death of Robert Fuller. Good. I think maybe an independent investigation is warranted. And what about Stephon Clark? That's what I want to know about Javier Becerra. When are you going to reopen the Stephon Clark case? Because Stephon Clark was murdered in his grandmother's backyard in Sacramento. He was holding nothing but a cell phone, and two fucking Sacramento Police Department officers unloaded their clips on Stephon Clark. And that's a terrible fucking murder, and there will never be justice on that one. And part of the reason is Javier Becerra, who as Attorney General declined to investigate it. So we'll see. I don't have high hopes about Javier Becerra's help in the Robert Fuller case. I don't have high hopes. So I was really blown away by the violence in Albuquerque, and I'm going to do that story as soon as I take a hit. Can I tell you? I've been smoking weed a long time, and I still cough like a newbie. All right. Violence at protests in Albuquerque. This is according to CNN. Vigilantes might have started the violence that led to a shooting in New Mexico during a demonstration on Monday, authorities said, and the governor is vowing to hold the instigators fully accountable. One man was hospitalized and another man charged with aggravated battery, Albuquerque police said. The shooting happened during a protest in the city's Old Town, calling for the removal of a sculpture of a Spanish conquistador, officials said. Now, I was very impressed by this statement from the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham. She tweeted the following. She did one of these cut and paste tweets so she could write a long message. Although we are still learning more about the situation, I am horrified and disgusted beyond words by the reports of violence at a protest Monday night in Albuquerque. The heavily armed individuals who flaunted themselves at the protest, calling themselves a civil guard, were there for one reason: to menace protesters, to present an unsanctioned show of unregulated force, to menace the people of New Mexico with weaponry, with an implicit threat of violence, is on its face unacceptable. That violence did indeed occur is unspeakable. I am monitoring the situation. My administration is in touch with local officials. The individual who was injured is in my prayers, and I am thinking of their family and friends. Let me be clear, there is absolutely no space in New Mexico for any violent would-be militia seeking to terrorize New Mexicans, and there is no space for violence of any kind on our streets, in our communities, or for any sort of escalation of reckless, violent rhetoric, no matter who strikes first. The instigators this evening will be rooted out, they will be investigated, and they will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. There's more news on this. They did actually arrest a couple of militia guys. I don't have the details on that. But, look, there's an extreme left and an extreme right in American politics, and only one of them buys guns. There are very few people on the left who believe in any kind of violent action or violent revolution. Almost the entire left is down with MLK and peaceful protest. Sorry, I had a sushi burp. So, these guys arm themselves to the teeth, and our failure to crack down on white supremacist violence is costly. It really is, because it makes them think they can get away with this shit. And we have another story out of the SFist. Santa Cruz shooter charged along with Boogaloo Movement accomplice in Oakland shooting of federal officers. Once again, a disturbing corner of the internet has popped into mainstream headlines by way of two men who were convinced a civil war is looming and that members of law enforcement needed to be killed. They found each other on Facebook, and now they stand accused of killing a federal officer and wounding another outside Oakland's Ronald V. Dellums Federal Building, and one of them is already accused of killing a Santa Cruz sheriff's deputy a week later. 32-year-old Air Force Sergeant Stephen Carrillo was charged in federal court on Tuesday with murder and attempted murder connected with the shooting death of 53-year-old federal security officer David Patrick Underwood on May 29th and the shooting of his partner in Oakland. Also charged alongside Carrillo was 30-year-old Robert Alvin Justice Jr. of Millbrae, a fellow follower of the loosely defined Boogaloo movement who allegedly drove the white van. Justice turned himself in to federal authorities last week, as the Mercury News reports, in the days following the fatal June 6th shooting in Santa Cruz County that Carrillo was arrested for. Federal agents were reportedly already surveilling Justice, having found the social media ties between him and Carrillo. So there's a lot of right-wing messaging about civil war and about there being a second civil war. I think Trump has tweeted something ridiculous about it. I don't remember what. But the Boogaloo movement is Civil War II, Electric Boogaloo. That's the incredibly lame play on words that is the origin of the Boogaloo movement's name. And it's all about having a second civil war. And look, both parties and both sides of the media ecosystem are responsible for fanning the fuel of hatred against the other side. I always say of Trump supporters, I want them to have housing, food, healthcare, and education. I want them to have what everyone else should have. I want them to have civil rights. I want them to have the First Amendment. And there's no way I'm going to get the Second Amendment repealed like I would like. So, they're safe on that front as well. Anyway, back to the story. Messages between the two on Facebook spell out their intentions. remarkably clearly, as the federal complaint now shows us. Go to the riots and support our own cause. Show them the real targets, Carrillo allegedly wrote in one post prior to the May 29th protests in Oakland, which he and Justice apparently used as cover for their own motives to kill federal officers. Use their anger to fuel our fire. Think outside the box. We have mobs of angry people to use to our advantage. Earlier statements from a friend of Carrillo's suggesting that he may have been pushed over the edge by images of law enforcement using force against civilian protesters around the country in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. So these guys are all over the place in their sympathies. In one exchange between Carrillo and Justice in a Facebook group on the morning of May 28th, just after one of the first nights of chaos in Minneapolis, Carrillo allegedly said, "It's on our coast now. This needs to be nationwide. It's a great opportunity to target the specialty group Soup Bois." Justice reportedly replied, "Let's boogie." Per the Mercury News, the term Soup Bois or Soup Boys, I don't know, is commonly used by Boogaloo followers to refer to federal agents. So I actually think it's fair to ask the question, are we in a race war right now? When we have killings like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Robert Fuller and Harsh. I forgot what his first name was. Apologies for that. Malcolm Harsh. And there's so many more. Recent, you know. And if you count the disproportionate COVID deaths, if you count the disproportionate life expectancy, if you count the disproportionate maternal deaths, we're in a race war right now, and it's a war against Black people. It's a war against Black people and all people of color. And all these people who want a race war, there's one raging right now. And it's being fought on the front lines by cops who are beating protesters. This entire response from the police across the country to these protests has been nothing but fascist violence. And that's violence against Black people and allies of Black people. That is a war against a race. So when you take all of the police killings into account, and this guy who just got shot outside of Wendy's, for falling asleep in his car, there's a war going on, and people are dying in the war. And the people who are dying are Black people and people of color. So I think you can make an argument that there is a race war underway, and the Boogaloo people are just too stupid to see that it's happening. And of course, they're sympathizing with the perpetrators of the race war that is currently going on. And it makes me wonder if Malcolm X isn't perhaps a better signifier from the 60s than MLK. As we go through this uprising. And I'm not saying that people should be employing violence, but Malcolm X also did not argue to commit violence against others. He argued for Black self-defense. He argued for Black nationalism. And I think, both he and Martin Luther King Jr. were calling for revolutionary change, but there's something about the voice of Malcolm X. Obviously, Angela Davis and so many other thinkers as well. I just got to thinking about Malcolm X in the last couple of days, and that sense of, no, this whole thing is fucking racist. And, in Malcolm X's case, he wanted to get away from it. But in our case, we're saying it's racist and we want to do away with it. So, but I think you can make an argument that there's a race war underway right now. I really do. Now let's talk about Trump's executive order that he signed today to establish a national certification system for law enforcement agencies and a database to better track excessive uses of force by police officers nationwide, a source familiar with the matter told CNN. This is from CNN. The executive order is also expected to direct the Secretary of Health and Human Services to encourage police departments to embed mental health professionals in their response to calls related to mental health, homelessness, and addiction, as well as to find resources to help police departments hire mental health co-responders, the source said. Jerron Smith, a deputy assistant to the president, confirmed Monday morning that the executive order will look to incentivize police departments to include mental health professionals as co-responders. Co-responders would allow for police to do their job, but bring in social workers and experts that deal with mental health and deal with issues such as drug addiction or alcohol addiction, or even other issues like homelessness, Smith said on Fox News Channel. This is a terrible motherfucking idea, and after I smoke, I'm going to tell you why. The little one worked again. What it means is that what this co-responders idea means is that in any situation where a cop is dealing with something that a cop shouldn't be dealing with, a mental health situation, an addiction situation, a homelessness situation, we know now that we need individual first responders for all of those different types of situations. And you can't bring a man with a gun, a person with a gun, excuse me. You can't bring a person with a gun into those situations because the person with the gun is always in charge. And the mental health expert needs to be in charge. The addiction counselor needs to be in charge, you know? And the gun and the bulletproof vest and the badge is intimidation. And somebody who's suffering with schizophrenia does not need the intimidation of a police officer in their face. I can think of so many mental health situations in which having a police officer in your face would not be helpful to the situation. Trump spoke this morning and added restricting chokeholds to the short list of reforms he's backing. Chokeholds should be banned entirely, and not leaving open the loophole that they can do it if they're in fear for their lives, because we've seen that abused over and over and over again. Just no more chokeholds. Because cops are always in fear for their lives based on what we've seen. So this executive order from Trump is basically worthless. When talking about it, all he did was kiss the cops' asses. I watched some of his speech this morning, and he kept saying this ridiculous thing that the American people, whether they know it or not, want more cops because they want more security in their communities. Cops, 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 cops. Did not mention George Floyd or the protesters. He did raise he did raise the success rates on violent crimes in Baltimore and Chicago, which are incredibly low, like 30% for murders, 20% for rapes, that basic area. And he said, well, that means we need more police in order to get those rates up. And it's actually the opposite. It means that we need to allow the police to focus on those crimes more by reducing their scope of responsibility. It's actually an argument that this system doesn't work and we should replace it. If our system is producing results of 20% of cases solved, 30% of cases solved, then it's a shitty system and we should probably scrap it and replace it with a system that will work. So, yeah, that's it for tonight. I may or may not live stream tomorrow night, but if you don't catch me tomorrow night, make sure you tune in on Thursday. I'm having a back procedure done tomorrow, and I just don't know if I'll be able to sit here in my very uncomfortable patio. So peace out. Hit like and subscribe. Share this video and tell people it's awesome, despite anything. And have a good night. Peace out.